The laugh echoed through Providence Municipal Court at exactly 9:47 a.m. It wasn't nervous laughter. It wasn't the kind of uncomfortable chuckle you hear from someone who knows they're in trouble. This was different. This was the sound of someone who genuinely believed the whole thing was beneath her. Madison Sterling, 17 years old, trust fund heiress whose father owns half the waterfront properties in Providence. She stood before Judge Caprio wearing designer jeans and carrying a handbag worth $2,400, treating his courtroom like an inconvenient appointment she had to check off her list. The charge? An $83 parking ticket. But here's what Madison didn't know. Her dismissive attitude, that entitled smirk, the way she giggled when the bailiff read the charges, it wasn't just disrespectful. It was about to expose her family's 3-year pattern of buying their way out of consequences. Because Judge Caprio noticed something in the file. A handwritten note from a courthouse clerk, tucked between the pages. It read, "Third, dismissed citation this year. Father made calls." This wasn't about an $83 ticket. This was about a family that had been manipulating the system, and a girl who'd learned that money erases mistakes. And that smirk? It would vanish the moment the judge pulled records showing 9 dismissed violations, 6 different officers, and 1 very angry letter from a disabled veteran she'd blocked in a handicap spot. If you've ever paid a ticket you couldn't afford while watching privilege walk free, if you've ever been told those are just the rules while someone else bends them, then you need to hear what happened next. Subscribe to Judgment Stories, because sometimes justice means a judge who refuses to look the other way when a teenager thinks consequences are optional. I'm warning you now, this one gets uncomfortable. Because entitlement doesn't break easily, and Judge Caprio wasn't about to let it slide. It was Thursday morning, 9:45, Providence Municipal Court, Courtroom 3B. The bailiff stood and read from the docket. Case 2024PT8847. Citation for parking in a fire lane. Defendant, Madison Sterling, age 17. Madison sat at the defense table in designer jeans, her Chanel bag casually dropped beside her chair. Her phone lay face up next to it. Manicured nails. Bored expression. Like she was waiting for a coffee order, not standing before a judge. Her father sat in the front row wearing a $3,000 suit, arms crossed, wearing the confident smile of a man who'd made problems disappear before. Judge Caprio looked up from the file. "Miss Sterling, you're here about a parking citation. Fire lane, downtown Providence. Do you remember this incident?" Madison actually giggled. "I mean, I was only there for like 5 minutes? My friend was picking up her Starbucks order. It's not like there was an actual fire." Her attorney, clearly expensive, clearly used to winning, leaned forward immediately.
"Your Honor, my client is a minor with no prior—"
Judge Caprio raised his hand. "I'll get to you, counselor." He looked back at Madison. "Let me read what the citation says. Parking in a fire lane, 11:20 a.m., directly in front of Engine Company 9. Duration of violation, 23 minutes, not 5, 23, and there's an officer notation here. It says, refuse to move vehicle when asked. Stated father would handle it." Madison rolled her eyes. "The officer was super rude. I told him I was waiting for someone. He could have just, asked nicely." Judge Caprio set the citation down slowly. "Miss Sterling, according to this report, the officer asked you 3 times to move your vehicle. You responded, and I'm quoting directly here, 'Do you know who my father is? Is that accurate?'" The courtroom went quiet. Madison shifted in her seat. "I mean, I don't remember exactly what I said. I was stressed." Judge Caprio flipped through the file. His eyebrows rose. "There's a notation here. Multiple notations, actually." He looked at the bailiff. "How many prior citations are attached to this defendant's record?" The bailiff checked his computer. "Several, Your Honor." "Pull every citation, parking, or otherwise filed under Madison Sterling for the past 3 years. And I want disposition records. I want to see what happened to each one." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. A woman in the 3rd row leaned toward her husband and whispered something. Madison's father's confident smile flickered. The bailiff returned 5 minutes later with a folder. Judge Caprio opened it, started reading aloud. March 2023, handicap parking violation, dismissed. June 2023, double parked in hospital emergency zone, dismissed. October 2023, fire lane violation, dismissed. January 2024, blocking accessible ramp, dismissed. He looked up. Miss Sterling, that's 4 violations in less than 2 years, and every single one was dismissed. Madison's attorney stood. Your Honor, those dismissals were processed through proper channels. I'm not finished, Counselor. Judge Caprio kept reading. February 2024, fire lane, dismissed. April 2024, handicap zone, dismissed. May 2024, no parking zone near a school crossing, dismissed. August 2024, emergency vehicle access lane, dismissed. September 2024, handicap parking, dismissed. He closed the folder and looked directly at Madison. 9 citations, 9 dismissals, and every single dismissal came after a phone call was logged from Sterling Properties, LLC. He paused. That's your father's company, isn't it? Madison stared at her lap. Bailiff, I want to see body cam footage from today's incident. Officer Martinez submitted it with his report. The screen at the side of the courtroom flickered on. The footage showed Madison's car, parked directly in front of a fire station. Officer Martinez approached the driver's side window. You could hear his voice clearly. Ma'am, you're parked in a fire lane. I need you to move your vehicle immediately. Madison's voice came through, annoyed. I'm waiting for someone. It'll just be a minute. Ma'am, this is an active fire lane. You need to move now. Seriously? There's no fire. Relax. The officer's tone stayed professional. This is your final warning. Move the vehicle or I'm writing a citation. And then Madison's voice crystal clear. My dad literally donates to the police union. You're gonna regret this. A pause, then laughter. Good luck keeping your job. The video ended. The courtroom was silent. Madison's face had gone pale. I was joking. It was obviously sarcasm. I was stressed. Judge Caprio removed his glasses. Miss Sterling, threatening an officer's job because your father donates money isn't sarcasm. It's abuse of power. You're 17 years old, and you already believe your father's money makes you immune to consequences. He picked up his phone, dialed a number, put it on speaker. Captain Reynolds, this is Judge Caprio, Providence Municipal Court. I have a question about Sterling Properties and police union donations. Can you confirm whether they make regular contributions? A man's voice came through the speaker. Yes, Your Honor. $25,000 annually. Mr. Sterling calls personally when issues arise involving his family. Issues meaning citations? A pause. Yes, Your Honor. How long has this been happening? We flagged it internally for about 3 years, but without formal complaints from officers, our hands are tied. Thank you, Captain. Judge Caprio hung up. And then someone stood up in the gallery. An older man, maybe late 60s, using a cane. Your Honor, may I speak? Judge Caprio nodded. My name is James Wilson. I'm a veteran. She parked in my handicap spot back in January. I couldn't get my wheelchair out of my van. Missed my pharmacy pickup because of it. Officer wrote the ticket. 2 weeks later, I called to check on it. They told me it was dismissed. No explanation. Nobody called me, just dismissed. The man's voice shook. I served 22 years, lost my legs in Iraq. I don't ask for special treatment, but I need that blue space. And when I couldn't access the pharmacy that day, I missed picking up my heart medication. My wife had to call an ambulance that night. The courtroom went completely still. $1,200 for the ambulance. Because a teenager couldn't walk an extra 50 feet. Madison was staring at the table now, her jaw tight. Judge Caprio turned back to the bailiff. What did the cross-reference show? The bailiff read from his screen. Madison Sterling, 9 citations, 9 dismissals over 3 years. Sterling Properties employees, 11 employees, 34 citations total, 31 dismissed. Judge Caprio wrote the numbers down. So in 3 years, this family and their employees accumulated 43 violations. 40 were dismissed. That's a 93% dismissal rate in a city where the average is 11%. He looked at Madison. That's more than one dismissed ticket per month. For 3 years, handicap zones, fire lanes, emergency access points, places that exist specifically to protect the most vulnerable people in our city. He picked up a piece of paper. Mr. Wilson submitted a written statement. Let me read part of it. I served 22 years. Lost my legs in Iraq. I don't ask for special treatment, but I need that blue space. When I couldn't access the pharmacy, I missed my heart medication pickup. My wife had to call an ambulance that night. $1,200 bill. Because a teenager couldn't walk 50 extra feet. Judge Caprio set the paper down. Miss Sterling, did you park in that handicap spot? Quietly. Yes. Did you know what the blue sign with the wheelchair symbol meant? Yes. Did you think about who might need that space? Who you might be blocking? Silence. That wasn't a no, Miss Sterling. He leaned forward. You saw a wheelchair ramp and thought, I'm more important. You saw a fire lane and thought, rules are suggestions. And when consequences showed up, your father made them disappear. That's not privilege. That's corruption you've been taught to expect. Judge Caprio removed his glasses, set them on the bench. 5 seconds passed. 7, 10. Madison's hands were folded in her lap. Her father leaned forward, ready to speak. The judge raised one finger. Not yet. 15 seconds. The courtroom wasn't just quiet. It was holding its breath. Accountability gets quiet. Judge Caprio finally said, so truth can be heard above excuses. He put his glasses back on. Here's my finding. The evidence is clear. Miss Sterling violated parking laws 9 times over 3 years. Not once did she demonstrate concern for public safety or the people those laws are designed to protect. Body cam footage confirms she threatened an officer. Officer testimony is consistent. Records confirm a pattern of dismissed violations following phone calls from her father's company. And we have documented impact on real people, including a veteran who nearly had a medical emergency because Miss Sterling decided convenience mattered more than his safety. Judge Caprio opened his notebook. The fine for today's violation is $83, but I'm reinstating all 9 dismissed citations. That brings your total to $2,500. Madison's attorney stood immediately. Your Honor, I'm not finished. I'm staying $1,500 of that fine, but only if Miss Sterling completes every single item on this list within 90 days. Miss even one task, and the full $2,500 is due immediately. He began reading. 1. Written apologies. Handwritten. Specific. Not to me, to the veteran whose handicap spot you took, to Officer Martinez who you threatened, and to every person affected by your violations. I want their names and what your actions cost them. No templates. No attorneys editing them. Your words. 2. 80 hours of volunteer service at the Veterans Medical Center. You'll be assisting with wheelchair transport and accessible parking coordination. Your supervisor will submit weekly reports directly to this court. 3. You will create and personally fund a 60-second public service announcement about accessible parking abuse. It will air on local television stations. Your name will be attached to it. 4. Completion of a defensive driving course and a disability awareness seminar. I want certificates. 5. A 1,500-word written reflection. I want the truth about what you believed money could buy, what you learned when it couldn't, and what privilege actually costs when you're not the one paying the price. 6. If Mr. Wilson agrees to meet with you, you will apologize to him in person, face to face, no script, no attorney present, just you. 7. 40 additional community service hours monitoring handicap parking at local hospitals. You'll report violations. You'll see what enforcement actually looks like when someone cares. Judge Caprio looked up. Miss Sterling, mercy is not a coupon for future bad behavior. It's a contract with your future self. Break this contract, and you'll learn that judges remember faces. And we remember patterns. Madison's father stood up. Your Honor, with all due respect, this seems excessive for a parking ticket. Perhaps we could discuss a resolution that doesn't involve public embarrassment. Mr. Sterling, sit down. Judge Caprio's voice was firm. Quiet resolutions are exactly how patterns like this continue. Your daughter threatened an officer on camera. She blocked a veteran from accessing medication. And she learned from you that money erases responsibility. This will be handled on the record, in public, with accountability. Madison grabbed her father's arm. Her voice was small. Dad, stop. Judge Caprio nodded at her. Your daughter is capable of speaking for herself. She's about to learn how. He made one more announcement. I'm also making 5 recommendations to the City Council, effective immediately. 1. All dismissed citations involving families who make political or police donations must be logged publicly within 30 days. 2. Any officer who receives threats related to writing citations must file a formal report. 3 threats against officers from one family triggers an automatic review. 3. Fire lane and handicap violations are now non-dismissible without medical or safety documentation. 4. Anonymous hotline for officers being pressured to dismiss citations. All reports trigger mandatory investigations. 5. Every new driver under 21 in Providence will watch a 10-minute educational video on accessibility laws and victim impact. He looked directly at the camera in the courtroom. If you believe wealth shouldn't buy immunity from basic decency, these reforms need to spread beyond Providence. Madison left the courtroom with her list of requirements. No smirk, no laughter, just a folder and 90 days to prove she could change. Day 1. Madison arrived at the Veterans Medical Center. Her supervisor, a former Marine named Sergeant Chen, handed her a wheelchair. You're pushing veterans to their appointments today. No phone, no complaints. You're here to serve people you inconvenienced. Day 8. Madison submitted her first apology letter to Mr. Wilson. Sergeant Chen rejected it. His note to the court. Too polished. Sounds like her attorney wrote it. Make her try again. This time, tell the truth about what she thought before the judge called her out. Day 15. Madison met James Wilson face to face in the hospital cafeteria. He rolled up in his wheelchair. She stammered through an apology, hands shaking. He listened. Then he said, You know what bothered me most that day? You didn't even look at me, like I was a parking cone. Not a person, just something in your way. Madison's voice cracked. I'm sorry. I didn't think. I know. That's the problem. Day 22. The PSA was being filmed. Madison sat in front of the camera, started reading from a script. The director stopped her. That sounds rehearsed. Say it like you mean it. She took a breath, started over. I used to think handicap spots were suggestions if you were in a hurry. I was wrong. These spaces exist because people like James Wilson need them to survive. And I almost cost him his life because I couldn't be bothered to walk 50 extra feet. If you see someone parked illegally in an accessible spot, report it. Because that space isn't a convenience. It's a lifeline. Day 45. Sergeant Chen submitted his halfway report to the court. Miss Sterling shows up early now, asks veterans about their service. Last week, she reported 3 violations in the hospital parking lot herself. One of them was her friend's car. She called her friend and told her to move it. That wasn't court-ordered. That was choice. Day 67. The 1,500-word reflection arrived at Judge Caprio's chambers. He read it that evening. One line stood out. I thought my father's money made me untouchable. It actually made me unable to see people as anything but obstacles to wherever I was going. Day 90. Madison returned to court. Alone. No attorney, no father. She wore jeans and a plain shirt. No designer bag. Just a folder of completion certificates. Judge Caprio reviewed each document. 80 hours at the VA completed. PSA aired 47 times across 3 local stations. Disability awareness, seminar, and defensive driving course both certified. 7 apology letters, all delivered and acknowledged. Miss Sterling, I want you to tell me, in your own words, what you learned. No script. Madison took a breath. I learned that I never thought about who I was inconveniencing because I never had to. My father made problems disappear before I ever had to face them. I met James Wilson. He told me about Iraq, about losing his legs, saving his unit, and I parked in his spot because I didn't want to walk. Her voice broke. That's unforgivable, but he forgave me anyway. And I don't know how to earn that. She continued. I relied on my last name, like it was armor. It wasn't armor. It was a blindfold. I stopped seeing people as people. They were just in my way. And what does accountability mean now? It means you can't undo harm, but you can stop pretending it didn't matter, and you can make sure you never do it again. Judge Caprio nodded slowly. You stopped treating people like background noise and started seeing them as human beings with lives that matter as much as yours. That's not nothing, Miss Sterling. He closed the folder. $1,000 remains due. Not as punishment, as a reminder that actions have costs. You'll pay it in installments. $100 a month for 10 months. From your own money, not your father's. Madison nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Within 60 days, Providence implemented all 5 reforms Judge Caprio recommended. The transparency logs went public. 23 previously hidden dismissals from donor families were exposed. 3 of them triggered formal investigations. The Officer Protection Protocol was activated 11 times in the first month. 4 cases led to formal reviews. 1 officer was exonerated after proving he'd been pressured by a city councilman to dismiss a ticket. Fire lane and handicap violations became non-dismissible. Enforcement became consistent. Violations dropped 34% in 6 months. But the impact didn't stop in Providence. Boston reviewed their dismissal records. Hartford implemented officer protection protocols. New Haven adopted public logging for dismissed citations involving political donors. The Disability Rights Coalition cited Madison's case in testimony before the Rhode Island State Legislature, pushing for statewide accessible parking enforcement standards. And the PSA Madison created? It became part of Rhode Island's driver's education curriculum. 14,000 teenagers have watched it so far. 6 months after the ruling, James Wilson spoke at a city council meeting. Judge Caprio didn't just hold one teenager accountable. He told an entire city that accessibility isn't a favor. It's a right, and it matters. He mentioned Madison, too. She sent me a card on Veterans Day, handwritten. She told me she's still volunteering at the VA every weekend. That's not court-ordered anymore. That's her choice. James keeps something on his desk at home. The $100 check Madison mailed him to cover his ambulance copay from that day. He never cashed it. I keep it as proof that people can change when someone finally tells them no. A hospital nurse emailed the court months later. I watched that PSA with my son. He has cerebral palsy. He saw Madison's story and asked me, Mom, do people really not care about our spots? We had a hard conversation, but now he knows some people do care, and some people learn to care. 3 local businesses added accessible parking spaces after their employees watched the PSA. One of them posted a sign in their parking lot with Madison's quote, "These spaces exist because people need them to survive." Judge Caprio keeps something in his chambers, the body cam transcript, the one where Madison said, "You're going to regret this. Good luck keeping your job." It's pinned to his bulletin board right next to her 90-day completion certificate. He explained why in an interview 6 months later. I keep both because redemption isn't a before and after photo. It's proof that the person who said those words isn't who she is anymore. He was asked what the case represented. Madison looked at a handicap spot and saw an inconvenience to her schedule. I looked at the same spot and saw a veteran who served 22 years and needed it to access his medication. Those are 2 very different things. One sees people, one doesn't. He paused. This case was never about parking tickets. It was about a system that taught a 17-year-old girl that money erases mistakes, and a courtroom that said, "Not here, not anymore." The reporter asked if he thought Madison really changed. I gave Madison a choice I wish someone had given her years ago. Face what you've done, or keep pretending it doesn't matter. She could have had her father make another call. She could have hired a better attorney and fought it. Instead, she showed up every single day for 90 days and did the work. Then she kept showing up when the court mandate ended. That's not me changing her. That's her choosing to change herself. Madison's case became a symbol. Judicial ethics seminars cite it. Disability rights advocates reference it. Law schools use it to teach about restorative justice and enforcement equality. 7 cities across the Northeast adopted similar reforms within 18 months. Public logging of dismissed violations, officer protection protocols, non-dismissible accessibility violations. Every single reform resolution cited Judge Caprio's ruling and Madison's transformation as proof that accountability and mercy can coexist. James Wilson made it possible by standing up in that courtroom and saying, "This happened to me." Madison made it possible by choosing growth over ego. Judge Caprio made it possible by refusing to look the other way. "I didn't change, Madison," he said. "I just refused to let her hide from what she'd done. She did the hard part." That courtroom in Providence proved something important. It proved that wealth doesn't make you untouchable. Character does. Madison Sterling proved that entitlement can break when someone forces you to look at the people you've been ignoring. Judge Caprio proved that mercy without accountability is just permission to keep hurting people. This case was never about parking. It was about whether we hold people accountable when it's uncomfortable or look away because it's easier. 3 truths came out of courtroom 3B that morning. 1. Rules exist to protect the vulnerable, not inconvenience the privileged. 2. Compassion isn't letting someone off the hook. It's giving them the tools to climb out of the hole they dug. 3. Justice means everyone faces their actions, but not everyone has to face them alone. So here's my question for you. Should dismissed citations from donor families be made public nationwide? Should every state adopt non-dismissible accessibility violations? Was 90 days enough for Madison to prove she changed, or should accountability last longer? Share your thoughts below. And subscribe to Judgment Stories for more cases where judges refuse to let privilege write the rules, where accountability doesn't mean destruction, it means transformation, and where one teenager's smirk becomes a city's policy reform. This has been a dramatization for storytelling and educational purposes, not legal advice or court reporting. But the lesson? That's real. Accountability gets quiet so truth can be heard. And sometimes, justice looks like a judge who refuses to look away when a 17-year-old girl learns the most important word she's never heard before. No. Because here's what most people don't understand about cases like Madison's. The system wasn't broken by accident. It was working exactly as designed for people who could afford to make it work for them. $25,000 a year buys a lot of phone calls, a lot of quiet conversations, a lot of problems that disappear before they ever reach a courtroom. And Madison? She was just doing what she'd been taught. Park wherever is convenient. Someone complains? Dad handles it. Officer writes a ticket? It goes away. Consequences? Those are for other people. She wasn't born entitled. She was trained to be. That's what made Judge Caprio's decision so radical. He didn't just punish her. He didn't just shame her and move on. He gave her something nobody had ever given her before, a mirror. 80 hours pushing wheelchairs at the VA. Do you know what happens when you spend 80 hours with veterans who've lost limbs in service? You stop seeing parking spots as empty spaces. You start seeing them as the difference between independence and helplessness. Madison told Sergeant Chen during week 6, "I met a guy today, Vietnam vet, 82 years old. He told me he hasn't driven in 3 years because people keep parking in the accessible spots. He said he just stays home now because it's easier than fighting for a space that's supposed to be his." Sergeant Chen asked her, "What did you say to him?" "I said I was sorry. That I used to be one of those people, and that I'm trying to do better." The vet looked at her and said, "Better is all any of us can do, kid." That conversation wasn't in any court report. Sergeant Chen mentioned it to Judge Caprio months later when they ran into each other at a community event. "She cried after that conversation," Sergeant Chen said. "Not performative crying, real grief, like she'd just realized how much harm she'd done without ever meaning to." That's the thing about accountability. Real accountability doesn't feel good. It feels like staring at every mistake you made and couldn't take back. Let me tell you what happened with the PSA. The first version Madison submitted: pure corporate damage control, polished script, perfect lighting, sounded like a lawyer wrote every word. The production company sent it to Judge Caprio's office for approval. He rejected it in 4 words: "This isn't the truth." Madison had to start over. No script, just her, a camera, and the story of what she did. Take 14. That's how many attempts it took before she got it right. In take 3, she blamed the system. "I didn't know the rules." In take 7, she blamed her father. "I was just doing what I was taught." In take 11, she cried but couldn't articulate why. Take 14. She sat down, looked directly at the camera, and told the truth. "My name is Madison Sterling. I'm 17, and I almost killed a veteran because I was too selfish to walk 50 feet. She described James Wilson, described parking in his spot, described learning later that he missed his heart medication because she blocked his access. I didn't see him as a person. I saw him as an inconvenience. And if Judge Caprio hadn't forced me to face what I did, I'd probably still be parking wherever I wanted, because I'd never had to see the people I was hurting." The PSA aired 47 times, but it went viral online. 2.3 million views in 6 weeks. The comment section became something unexpected. Hundreds of people shared their own stories. "I have manuscrast. Someone parked in my spot at the grocery store last month. I waited 30 minutes for them to come back. They rolled their eyes when I asked them to move. My daughter uses a wheelchair. We've stopped going to certain restaurants because their accessible parking is always blocked. I'm a delivery driver. I used to park in fire lanes because it was faster. I watched this video and realized I was Madison. I don't do that anymore." That's the ripple effect Judge Caprio was counting on. One case, one courtroom, one judge who refused to look away. And suddenly, thousands of people were having conversations about accessibility they'd never had before. But let's talk about what happened behind the scenes, because the power players didn't just give up. 2 weeks after the ruling, Madison's father requested a private meeting with Judge Caprio. He brought his attorney, and a check for $50,000 made out to the Providence Veterans Fund. Judge Caprio refused the meeting. Mr. Sterling tried going through the mayor's office. The mayor called Judge Caprio personally. "Frank, Sterling Properties is a major donor to city infrastructure projects. Maybe we can find a compromise that satisfies everyone?" Judge Caprio's response was one sentence. "The compromise is that his daughter completes her accountability plan and learns that money doesn't erase harm." The mayor didn't push further. But here's what most people don't know. 3 other families with similar patterns of dismissed citations were quietly investigated after Madison's case went public. One was a state legislator's family. 41 dismissed violations over 5 years. The investigation found documented evidence of phone calls to the police chief before each dismissal. The legislator resigned 4 months later. Another was a real estate developer who'd been dismissed for construction zone violations 17 times. His company had been parking equipment in bike lanes, bus stops, and accessible spaces. Every citation dismissed after a call to the transportation department. His company was fined $200,000 and barred from city contracts for 3 years. The third case involved a local celebrity. Dismissed violations at private schools, country clubs, and gated communities. Her attorney tried to argue that she had security concerns that justified special parking privileges. Judge Caprio personally reviewed that case, rejected the argument, reinstated every citation. She paid $11,000 in fines and completed 100 hours of community service. None of those cases would have been investigated if Madison hadn't been forced to face accountability in open court. That's the systemic impact. One case becomes a flashlight, and suddenly, everyone can see what was happening in the dark. 7 months after the ruling, Madison's high school invited her to speak at an assembly about privilege and accountability. She almost said no. Her attorney advised against it. "You've completed your court requirements. You don't owe anyone a public confession." But Madison went anyway. She stood in front of 400 students and told them everything. The parking violations, the threats to Officer Martinez, the veterans she'd blocked. The moment Judge Caprio read the body cam transcript out loud and she realized she couldn't lie her way out. "I thought my dad's money made me special," she said. "It just made me ignorant. I didn't see people. I saw obstacles. And it took a judge forcing me to push wheelchairs for 80 hours before I understood that every single parking spot I stole, every fire lane I blocked, every accessible ramp I ignored, those weren't just violations. They were people's lives I was treating like they didn't matter." A student raised their hand. "Do you think you would have changed if the judge had just made you pay the fine?" Madison didn't hesitate. "No, I would have had my dad pay it and forgotten about it by the next day. I needed to see the people I hurt. I needed to hear their stories. I needed to feel what it's like to serve instead of being served." Another student. "Are you still volunteering at the VA?" "Every weekend. I'm applying to college next year. I want to study healthcare administration because I learned that systems either protect people or they protect power. And I want to spend my life building systems that protect people." The auditorium went silent. Then someone started clapping, then another. Within seconds, 400 students were on their feet. Madison cried through the entire standing ovation. Afterward, 3 students approached her privately. Each one admitted they'd done similar things. Parked in accessible spots because it was convenient. Blocked fire lanes because they were just running in for a second. Dismissed it as no big deal because they'd never faced consequences. "I'm going to stop," one of them said. "Because of you." That conversation never made it into any news report, but Madison told Judge Caprio about it during a check-in hearing 6 months later. "I thought the worst thing that could happen was people knowing what I did," she said. "Turns out the best thing that could happen was people knowing what I did, because now they're changing too." Judge Caprio smiled. "That's what accountability looks like when it's done right. It doesn't just change you. It changes everyone watching." Let's talk about James Wilson one more time, because his part in this story didn't end with Madison's apology. After the case became public, James started getting calls from other veterans, people who'd experienced similar situations, blocked accessible parking, dismissed as inconveniences, told to just wait while someone ran inside for just a minute. He started documenting these stories. 53 veterans in Providence alone reported similar incidents over the past 5 years. James brought the documentation to the city council, presented it during public comment, told them, "Accessibility isn't a courtesy, it's civil rights, and this city has been treating it like a suggestion for people who have the right connections." The council voted unanimously to adopt Judge Caprio's 5 reforms citywide. But they went further. They created an accessible parking task force. James Wilson was appointed as chair. Within a year, the task force had increased fines for accessibility violations from $150 to $500, implemented a 3-strike policy, 3 violations in 2 years, results in license suspension, created a public database where citizens can report accessibility violations with photo evidence, installed automated cameras at high violation locations that issue citations without requiring officer presence, launched an education campaign in partnership with disability advocacy groups. The violations dropped 62% in 18 months. But more importantly, the culture shifted. People started seeing accessible parking not as extra spaces nobody uses, but as critical infrastructure for community members who need them. James was interviewed by a local news station on the 1-year anniversary of Madison's ruling. The reporter asked, "Do you think Madison Sterling deserved the punishment she received?" James shook his head. "She didn't receive punishment. She received education." There's a difference. Punishment would have been a fine she never felt and a lesson she never learned. What Judge Caprio gave her was the opportunity to understand why those laws exist. And she took that opportunity seriously. Do you forgive her? James paused. I forgave her the day she sat across from me in that hospital cafeteria and couldn't get through her apology without crying. Not because she was in trouble, but because she finally understood what her actions cost me. That's real remorse, and real remorse deserves real grace. He pulled out his wallet, showed the reporter the uncashed check Madison sent him. I keep this because it reminds me that people are capable of change when someone believes they're worth the effort. Judge Caprio believed Madison was worth the effort, and he was right. Here's something that doesn't get talked about enough in stories like this. Judge Caprio didn't have to do any of this. He could have accepted the fine, processed the dismissal like the previous 9, and moved on to the next case. He had 300 cases on his docket that week. Madison Sterling was just another parking ticket. But he didn't move on. He pulled records. He investigated. He called witnesses. He watched body cam footage. He gave a 17-year-old girl the one thing she'd never received in her life, accountability that came with an instruction manual for how to be better. That's the difference between a judge and a system administrator. A system administrator processes cases. A judge sees people and asks whether justice is actually being served. Judge Caprio was interviewed about the case 8 months later. The interviewer asked why he didn't just dismiss it like the others. Because every time we dismiss a case like that without question, we're teaching someone that the rules don't apply to them, and we're teaching everyone else that the system doesn't work for them. Madison had been taught for 17 years that money makes problems disappear. If I'd dismissed that ticket, I would have just reinforced that lesson. And she'd be 27, then 37, then 47, still parking in handicap spots and fire lanes because nobody ever told her no. So, this was about her future? This was about everyone's future. Hers, yes, but also James Wilson's. And every other person who uses accessible parking and wonders if today's the day someone will block them again and nothing will happen. This was about sending the message that those spaces matter, those laws matter, and the people they protect matter. The interviewer asked one final question. What do you want people to take away from this case? Judge Caprio thought for a long moment. I want people to understand that justice isn't about punishment. It's about restoration. Madison needed to understand the harm she caused so she could stop causing it. James needed to be heard so he could believe the system actually sees him. The city needed policy reform so this pattern couldn't continue. That's justice. Not revenge. Not humiliation. Just honest accountability and the opportunity to do better. He paused. And I want people to know that it's never too late to start seeing the people you've been ignoring. Madison was 17. She had her whole life ahead of her. She could have spent it believing she was untouchable. Instead, she's spending it volunteering with veterans and advocating for accessibility. That's not a punishment. That's a gift. And she earned it by doing the hard work of facing what she'd done. It's been 2 years now since Madison Sterling stood in that courtroom and laughed. She's 19. She's in college, studying healthcare administration with a minor in disability studies. She still volunteers at the VA every weekend, not because a court requires it, because she wants to. She's written 3 op-eds for local newspapers about privilege, accountability, and accessibility. She speaks at high schools and colleges about her experience. She's consulted with 2 other cities that are implementing similar parking enforcement reforms. Last month, she testified before the Rhode Island State Legislature in support of a bill that would make accessibility violations non-dismissible statewide. She told the legislators, I was 17 when I learned that my convenience was costing people their independence. I'm 19 now, and I'm still learning what accountability actually means. But I know this. If we want a society that values all people, we have to build systems that protect all people. And that starts with enforcing the laws that already exist to do exactly that. The bill passed. 43-7. James Wilson was in the gallery when the vote happened. He caught Madison's eye afterward, gave her a small nod. She smiled. They get coffee once a month now. He tells her stories about Vietnam. She tells him about her classes. They talk about the task force and what's working and what still needs to change. She's like a granddaughter to me now, James said recently. Not because I've forgotten what she did, but because I've watched her become someone who would never do it again. That's what redemption looks like, not forgetting the harm, but growing past it into something better. So, here's what I want you to understand about this story. Madison Sterling laughed in court because she thought she was untouchable. Judge Caprio spoke because he knew she wasn't. And in the 90 days between that laugh and her return to court, something fundamental shifted. A 17-year-old learned that money doesn't erase harm. A veteran learned that the system could actually work for him. A city learned that accessibility laws matter. And thousands of people watching learned that accountability doesn't mean destruction, it means transformation. That's the power of one courtroom moment, when a judge refuses to look away. That's the power of one teenager who chooses growth over ego. That's the power of one veteran who stands up and says, "This happened to me, and it matters." Providence, Rhode Island, is different now because of what happened in courtroom 3B that Thursday morning. 7 other cities are different because they adopted the same reforms. 14,000 teenagers are different because they watched Madison's PSA in driver's ed. And Madison Sterling is different because someone finally told her no and then showed her how to become someone who didn't need to be told. That laugh that echoed through the courtroom at 9:47 a.m., it's been replaced by something quieter, something harder to measure but impossible to miss. Humility, awareness, purpose. The kind of transformation that only happens when accountability meets mercy, when consequences come with instruction, and when judges remember that their job isn't just to process cases, it's to see people and ask whether justice is actually being served. Subscribe to Judgment Stories, because sometimes the most important cases aren't about what happens in the courtroom. They're about what happens after someone walks out of it and decides who they want to become. This is what justice looks like when it's done right. Not perfect, not easy, but real. And that laugh that started this whole story? It ended the moment Madison Sterling realized she wasn't untouchable. She was accountable. And that made all the difference.